Good morning. I'd like to introduce the rest of our panel. First, we have Dustin, Jen, Brandon, and Seth. Glad everyone could make it this morning. This topic is about growth, and it's a growth tutorial. For those of you who had attended other sessions this morning, there's been a lot of talk about growth. I think we're going to add a different perspective, hopefully agree on some things, but we may disagree on some other things. But this is a very esteemed panel when it comes to growth. So I'll introduce myself. I'm Janice O'Reilly. I am the CEO of a seed-to-sale cannabis consulting company that is also a subsidiary of AFCPA. So we've been in the cannabis business for about 12 years, clients across the country, but based in Massachusetts. To my right, we have Dustin.
My name is Dustin Milner. I'm the Chief Executive Officer at Talaria Brands. We have a top-selling brand in California called Cream of the Crop that serves most of the state and have been there for 8 years.
Hi, good morning. I'm Jen Fisher. I'm a partner at Goodwin. We were one of the first large law firms to get into the cannabis space and start working with clients and operators in cannabis in 2015. And I'm based in San Francisco. We do transactional work, regulatory advice and counseling, and we represent cannabis companies and investors in litigation around the country.
My name is Brandon Barksdale. I'm the CEO of Remedy Maryland, which is one of the largest retail dispensaries in Maryland. We operate 20,000 square feet. I've been operational since 2017 now. Happy to be here.
My name is Seth Yakatan. I'm a capital markets advisor for Glass House, and through a family office and advisory firm, have interest in about 8 cannabis companies. So.
I'm going to start off by asking the question, why? Why would you want to grow? And we're going to start out with Dustin, who's going to give us some pros and cons of growth.
Thank you. The question of why, I think, is really important because if you start a cannabis business, there is pressure. You feel pressure, you see your competitors growing. If you have investors, they're pushing you to grow. And then there's human nature, which is to grow and to do more. Seth and I were talking about this backstage, and when I talk to other founders, and they say, well, we want to go into this state, we want to go into that state, expand into this market, and ask them why, oftentimes they say, well, it just feels right. That feels like the next step. The pro of that is you're right. Yeah, you can grow and you can grab more market share, and maybe that's a pathway to an exit, but it comes wrought with risk. And the challenge back to that question is, well, why would you grow? Have you already maximized what you can do with your existing market? Have you already dialed in your standard operating procedures to where you've maximized efficiencies in your business? Have you expanded into all the product lines that you're capable of producing? And have you ultimately optimized your product set and the company as it sits in your current market? And most importantly, that any investor is going to ask, are you cash flow positive? If the answers to those questions are no, I would challenge, well, why would you go into another state if there is still meat on the bone in the market that you're currently in?
Jen, when you see your clients decide to move into another state, for example, can you describe some of the challenges that they've encountered?
Sure. I mean, we work with a lot of clients that are always looking to expand, and we really try and help them think through the best strategic way to do that, and also how to structure their relationships with potential new partners in that space, if they're in that state, if they're operators. And while from a legal perspective, we can usually replicate agreements we've used for clients in other states, what really ends up mattering the most is who they partner with and how that partnership is going to operate on a day-to-day basis. Some of the challenges we've seen is people not doing enough diligence on the state they want to enter, not really understanding the regulatory environment fully, and then maybe not always picking the right partners, which has led to disputes. And I think one of the things that's really challenging for operators is when they fall into a situation where the relationship isn't working, they have contractual obligations, and those obligations can't be met or aren't being met, and then it becomes a choice of what to do about it. And if it ends up in litigation, that can be expensive and distracting for the company. So we try and really think through and evaluate all of those risks in advance, help our client navigate those risks, and really protect against them before they decide to expand into new states.
As Dustin said earlier, it's harder to get out of than it is to get into, so make sure you're getting the right advice. And we're going to move on now to Brandon as an operator of 2 very large dispensaries in Maryland. We talked a little bit about organic growth versus inorganic growth, and I know that you evaluate both on a regular basis. Would you like to give us some perspective on how you make your decisions about growth?
Yeah. Every day is different. Every opportunity is different. When we look at acquisitions in the landscape and think about how to internally grow ourselves to become more profitable, to increase our enterprise value, we're constantly trying to evaluate where the strongest market opportunity lies. Right now, we're strongly horizontal. We feel that is a good position for us in the state. And every day we contemplate how to carve out additional profitability percentage points within our business. And so every now and again we look and we say, okay, well, is it the right time? Time is extremely important. Luckily, our market is very well positioned, and there's not a huge influx of opportunity out there right now. So it helps us kind of keep our heads down and stay focused. But from time to time, we're looking at things that can add additional market share to our business. And so constantly we're looking to evaluate those things. Constantly we look outside of the horizontal landscape and say, hey, is there a vertical opportunity that we can take advantage of to well position ourselves for the future? And again, constantly it's really about timing. It's about, where you are health-wise as an organization as well. And again, if there's still meat on the bones, like Dustin mentioned, we definitely want to make sure that we're capturing that first and foremost before we look left or look right.
Thank you. Seth, 2-part question. You do a lot of capital advising in the space. You know the space very well. How do you look at companies that you're dealing with from a growth perspective? Is it something that you support? And then part B of that is, how do you think it impacts valuation?
Well, capital in and of itself requires growth. So you have to give someone a return. So, any industry is looking at ways to grow. I think, in this industry, it tends to be mediated by the fact that there seems to be such a strong first mover advantage that brands specifically, or MSOs, feel like entering a state where you're going from kind of zero, to a market creates a logarithmic growth opportunity, and I think people want to try and take advantage of that. So, from a capital perspective, I tend to want to understand why, and is there an empiric reason why, or is there a gut reason why? So, when I meet a brand, as an example, and they're in 3 states and they want to go to another 2, if there's not a quantitative empiric reason or a quantifiable reason, and it's based more upon gut and it fits the model, I think it can modulate the relative expectation. I do think that there's a valuation premium that's afforded to people who have been able to get into multi-state. I also think if you have a model that generates cash flow and you're able to generate that on a multi-state basis, it becomes accretive. So I do think it has a relative positive impact if it's manifest in the right way.
From a growth perspective, we can look at it 2 different ways. We can look at inorganic growth and we can look at organic growth. One of the ways that we can look at organic is through product diversification, branding. I'd love to have Dustin's thoughts on that because I think he's been very successful.
Yeah, thank you. We've approached it both ways. So we started the business from a brand standpoint with the expectation of vertically integrating as the market reached maturity and acquiring assets at discounts. And we've executed on that. So we've done both organic and inorganic growth. Cream of the Crop, our flagship brand, has grown to be one of the top selling brands in California. And when you're thinking about if you're moving into a brand space or you want to do a branded product, I think for us, it starts with who are you trying to reach? And what is the promise? Ultimately, a brand is just a promise that you're going to deliver to a set of customers on a consistent basis. So what is that promise that you're making to the customer? And does it resonate? And then secondarily, it's what is the cannabis, especially in California, the cannabis market is so saturated and there are so many products on the market that then it comes down to small nuances. And how can I better solve a challenge for a customer with this product than the competition is doing? So we recently launched a pre-roll pack, and a pre-roll pack is nothing new. We're not reinventing the wheel, but we did it in a way that we felt spoke to the needs of our customers, which is they wanted something that was slim, that was easy to carry, and that was discreet. And so we designed it in a way that met those needs, and it's had tremendous success. Just even in the first launch, 2 months of worth of inventory sold out in 2 weeks. So when you go through the actual process of evaluating your customers, understanding their needs, determining what the promise is that you can deliver to, because it's also a function of what assets and capabilities you have in your resource set, then you land on something that looks like it could be a winner. But you have to go through that process first and then rinse and repeat, right? Find something that works, develop a name for yourself, and then continue to expand beyond that. But we've been a big fan of organic growth because as you're developing your company, organic is a relatively low risk way to do it versus inorganic comes wrought with a whole other slew of issues, such as was there something missed in due diligence? Does the team working for the business that we're acquiring, is it going to get along and seamlessly filter in and work within our culture? Not to mention the capital requirements, negotiations, and it generally can be a distraction because for example, we've diligenced 15 businesses that we ended up doing nothing with. And so there's a pipeline methodology of if you're looking to grow inorganically, it also requires a team to be able to do that alongside skills and expertise that, so it's not the first time doing it.
Can I jump in on that too?
Yes, Seth.
I also think it depends on the needs of the organization, right? So if you're a $10 million a year revenue company and you're going to grow revenue by 30%, you can do that organically. If you're a $150 million, or let's just keep the math easy because I'm not that smart. If you're a $200 million revenue company and you want to grow organically by 30%, you're Apple, right? So I think depending upon the need of the growth of the organization, sometimes M&A or inorganic growth drives a faster top line yield. And so I just think organic growth as you get larger is much harder at scale.
Well, and the problem sets change entirely depending on what stage you are in the company. So when I'm speaking to not the $200 million company, because Seth's absolutely right. To gain 30% growth at $200 million in revenue, it's very challenging to do organically. And organic growth is slow. It takes a lot of time and takes trial and error. But Seth, I think it's a great point.
And when we think about the audience, there's I think a lot of advice that Brandon could give as an operator on his own diversification of product, his own ideas about his own stores and the brands that he's carrying. I thought maybe you could just add a little bit more to what you had said before about how you make decisions about the products that you're carrying.
The products that we carry are really driven by our customer base. We constantly are evaluating on a daily basis what's moving, what's not, and because Maryland was a little later to adult use, we're able to also kind of study other markets and kind of have some level of anticipation of what's to come. I think based off of the products that are available in our marketplace, again, we try to keep the most diverse SKU selection as possible, even if it's just 1 or 2 units, just to make sure that we have something for everybody. And I think that that's something that has been a differentiator for us because as a horizontal operator and focusing specifically on retail, we don't really have a perspective of we have to carry our own products, right? We carry the best products with the best customer acceptance rate that there are available to us. And so constantly that's, how we look at things. And obviously we also are looking at profitability of those products, trying to prioritize how we package those, bundle those, and message those to our customer base. And we have found that we have a little bit of power in that as well. We can surely highlight certain products and move them faster based off of our bud tenders really just being able to be knowledgeable and focus on how to drive certain products. And we could see that uptake a product 800 to 1,200% in a week.
So if you're a dispensary, and I know I get this question oftentimes from my dispensary clients, and that want to grow their top line. So you think the training of the bud tenders, you think product diversification, those are some key areas for them to look at for growth?
Yeah, that's one of them for sure. And I think as brands want stores to perform better, the more they spend with that last line of defense, which would be your bud tender, you'll see obviously heightened improvement on sales movement as well. Bud tenders are generally like the last person the customer talks to before they transact, and the more they know about your product, the more willing they are to
hopefully
give that
increase
advice.
that basket size.
Exactly.
Seth?
Exactly.
Yeah, but like right there's a really interesting market-specific growth question, right? So you're horizontal. So the way that my mind works is I say, well, you're going to pick up more margin if you go white label. So automatically I'm going to push you in a different thought direction, right? Then the conversation is like, how many opportunities, depending upon your license structure there, do you see to go into a small grow, right? So the question about growth, there's no playbook in cannabis. We've been here for 10 years. I don't have Ford or General Motors or Toyota to be able to say, here's exactly how to do it. So I think the other really challenging thing about growth is we could sit here and give you 7 ideas about what to do to pick up more margin. They might not be fundamental to running a retail business though, right? So like, should you go spend $7 million to build a grow? Is that what you know how to, is that your competency, right? It just brings up a lot of really interesting conversations that in the context of a lot of the companies that I see, the ones that are the most successful have a very specific, focused strategy.
Yes, Dustin.
I want to comment
Yeah.
on that. This is a really important point. In cannabis, there are a ton of shiny objects. Whether it's a new state or it's hemp-derived cannabinoids or it's the next greatest thing. Every waking moment, there are shiny objects. And the most successful entrepreneurs, it's not what you say yes to, it's what you say no to. And they'll say no to everything except maybe 2 big ideas a year. And so staying focused on what your core business, what you have the capacity to do, what you have the resources to do, and where you can minimize risk is key and fundamental to growth. And growth also looks different. It could be revenue growth, but it could also be margin growth. It can be profitability growth. It can be skills and resource growth. Like growth comes in a myriad of different forms. So thinking about it only from a revenue standpoint is short-sighted, especially in this market as investor interests are shifting away from revenue growth and really looking more at how are you growing margins, how are you growing the bottom line, and what's your cap table balance sheet look like.
I think Dustin's right in that M&A has really been the bread and butter of our cannabis practice since we got started in this space. And I think one thing we've seen over time are those shining objects, and a lot of deals that didn't go through, many times for good reasons. But I think helping our clients navigate through opportunities and then really being able to evaluate whether they make sense or not. And sometimes the best answer is it doesn't make sense. And as disappointing as that can be after you've invested time and resources into pursuing a deal, it can be the best decision can be to not do the deal. And I think we really try and work with our clients to understand what some of the risks are, along with the opportunities, and really evaluate whether, the inorganic growth that they're looking at makes sense for where they want to be in the market.
And I
also,
think-
historically, it's also going to bring up a very interesting contextual conversation, which is and I might get some very angry people, is the MSO model the right model? Why is the MSO model the model? The MSO model's the model. It's the first model that showed up, and they got the most capital, and they were the first ones there. Is that how cannabis is going to be distributed 10 years from now, 20 years from now? I don't know. So when you look back at the way that the industry was created kind of from an unequal perspective, and I'm not sure that the vertically integrated, hegemonious state-by-state model is going to prove to be the correct model long term, but it's the model that has been manifest because of the capital advantage that those companies have.
Yes, Brent.
I think it was probably most recently when we were transitioning to adult use. We were getting hit with offers left and right. And I think the one thing that definitely resonates is that keeping focused is one of the most important things, because if you're able to capture what you're doing right and it's seemingly what others are failing at, like, the attention is on you. In our market, we have a specific market share. Like, we're about 6 to 7% of the total market. So if somebody wants to grow their business, they're looking at that 6 or 7% and seeing exactly how can I inorganically add that to my enterprise. And so I think, again, like, if you're able to do it right and really heads down, focus, chip away at all the performance improvement areas that you possibly can to organically make your company as healthy as possible, and then again, through inorganic opportunity, you'll get to where you're going.
You bring up a good point, and I'm going to go back to that, what Dustin was talking about. When we talk about growth, are we just talking about top-line growth? And I think you're bringing up points that, no, we're also looking at margin, we're looking at perhaps cash flow growth, we're looking at EBITDA, we're looking at a lot of different areas of growth. And I think we as a team have talked about controlled growth, more slow and steady growth, which is more of the organic growth. But is it more important, do you think, to have a very strong bottom line, strong cash flow, or a strong top line?
Well, strong bottom line and strong cash flow are going to come from a strong top line. So they're obviously, they're very linked. But I think in this market, strong bottom line, stronger cash flow is more important than what the revenue number looks like. And there's many, many companies that have focused, big companies, name brand companies that we all know and have read about, that focused on top line revenue, expecting to be another funding round, and that funding round didn't come and the company crashed. There's been about a dozen just in California over this last year and a half alone. So the focus on growing bottom line and growing cash flows, that gives you infinite runway and staying power. And so yes, you will find that there are competitors that are growing faster than you. We experienced this in California. We saw so many of our competitors growing faster and larger and getting all of the attention, and we stayed focused on what we're doing, and we're around today and they are not. And so I think there's a lot to take from that in terms of focus on what you're good at. Figure out the thing that you can do better than anybody else and do that. And then begin to expand your skill set and your base. But don't focus on growth just to drive a top line revenue if you're not building a solid business in the process.
And Seth, when you look at companies, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, long-term cash flow wins, period, in any business I've ever looked at. So it's hard to be profitable in cannabis. And if you are, I think that gives you a significant competitive advantage over others. So yeah, I mean, you're seeing, specifically in California, a series of accelerations, right? Because those companies don't have enough cash flow to pay their debt. And debt's the only capital that's really been available to them. So yeah, in the end, cash flow wins.
So we've talked a little bit about brands. That leads us then to licensing. And I'd like Jen to talk a little bit about some of these licensing agreements that she has seen and some of the pitfalls, perhaps, in some of the licensing agreements.
Well, I think we always look at opportunities, particularly when our clients are looking to move into new states. Just as an example, sort of how much they want to invest, if they want to do an asset light model and just really license the intellectual property and the brand, or if they want to have more control over the operations. And so those are really two different models. It depends a lot on the company and what they're looking for, how much control they want over the quality and production process. And I think depending on their ability to invest resources, that tends to be the more successful route in terms of making sure there's consistency in the brand across states, which I think is really important for brand awareness and brand loyalty. And so I think we tend to work more on, figuring out ways that our clients who are maybe licensing their brand in other states can still maintain a level of control over the operations that makes sense for them without running afoul of some of the regulatory traps that come along with, moving into new states. So it's been a challenge, and we've seen lots of different models, and companies decide to do it in different ways, many of which have been successful, others that haven't been as successful. Really depends on the strength of the brand to begin with, and the development of that brand in one state, and how easy or not it is to launch in additional states.
I have some strong views on that, shockingly. I think of the two models, the asset light model, you're just not going to make as much money and have as much control. And there's a select number of companies that have been successful at doing that, and I think probably Old Pal comes to mind as probably being the most successful. I think the more successful financial companies are the ones that control the license and put their own operations and put their own people in. And I'll tirelessly talk about two of my favorite companies in Timeless and Gruen Edibles that I think are the brightest shining objectifications of those models, and have done it very, very, very well, and will continue to do it well.
But we also go back to what is a brand, and a brand is consistently delivering to a promise to the customer. So in evaluating whether it's a licensing deal, part of the challenge with a licensing deal is there is with some carve-outs, right? Wild has done a great job. Like you said, Old Pal has a slightly different model. There's brands that have done it and have done it successfully. Many of those brands have had scale and capital to put into the licensing agreements that they're doing. But if you're looking at expanding into a new geography via a licensing model, the core thing there is maintaining consistency of your brand promise and the product that's going to be delivered to a customer, so that you're not creating an environment where it's one product in one state and one product in another state. That's not a brand. That's just a licensing play. That's a play for money, but that's not going to build long-term sustainable value.
We see a ton of products come across, as you probably imagine. And I mean, the ones that we know of that have been more consistent from a quality perspective, from a brand perspective, and overall execution, and in my opinion, has generally been the manufactured products. It's easier to dial those in. It's easier to replicate that recipe to get it exactly how it was somewhere else. The flower has been very, very challenging to maintain consistency in multiple markets, and typically those just become licensing plays, right? Just from a brand recognition or a brand equity perspective and the unconventional sense of the word. And so, I would say as people, look out to see what makes the most sense, that SKU product kind of diversity is super important within your brand, and focus on the thing that you have most dialed in to be the first thing that you put out. And that's kind of synonymous across the board in any industry. If you look at food, if you look at whatever, you want to make sure that you have a very strong operation before you put something out there that can actually be flawed from another customer's perspective.
Very good point. We're at the end of our time. I want to thank our panelists, Seth, Brandon, Jen, and Dustin. I hope you were able to pull a few nuggets out of this presentation.